Welcome to the LDN Radio Show, brought to you by the LDN Research Trust. I'm your host, Linda Elseygood. I have an exciting lineup of guest speakers who are LDN experts in their field. We will be discussing low-dose naltrexone and its many uses in autoimmune diseases, cancers, etc. Thank you for joining us. This show is sponsored by Dr. Tom O'Brien, who is thrilled to share that his company, thedoctor.com, offers some powerful products to help reverse autoimmune disease. At thedoctor.com/PRPSPRAY, you'll find 9 products to help you decrease inflammation, repair the gut, and rebuild the immune system. I'd like to welcome back our guest, Dr. Tom O'Brien, today, who's going to be talking about his book, The Autoimmune Fix. Thank you for joining me, Tom.
Oh, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be with you, Linda.
So, could you tell us, what can we expect with reading your book?
If there's one thing, I guess, that you could expect from reading the book, it's continual OMGs. Oh my God, I didn't know this. Oh my God, I didn't know this. And this will happen again and again because the book is about first, the prevalence of autoimmunity. Some people just aren't familiar with the studies that talk to us. We've known for a long time, immunologists tell us that autoimmune disease is the number 3 cause of getting sick and dying. It's referred to as morbidity and mortality. It's the number 3 cause of getting sick and dying in the industrialized world. And in the United States, for example, 9 million people a year are diagnosed with cancer. 22 million people a year are diagnosed with cardiovascular disease. 24 million people a year are diagnosed with autoimmune diseases, much more common than cancer or cardiovascular disease. And the National Institute of Health tells us that only 1 out of 3 people that have an autoimmune disease are diagnosed. That means that there's 72 million people out there card-carrying autoimmune disease patients. That's the first startling statistic, is that it's the most prevalent cause of getting sick and dying in the world, and much more than cancer, much more than cardiovascular disease. The second realization that comes is that autoimmune disease, nobody wakes up with Alzheimer's in their 60s or 70s, and Alzheimer's is an autoimmune mechanism. Nobody wakes up with Alzheimer's. It takes decades. Scientists know that it takes decades of slowly killing off your brain cells before your brain's not functioning very well, and you say, oh, I'm not remembering the way I used to. I'm getting old. And you say, well, really, how old are you? Well, I'm 44. And the answer is no, that's not supposed to happen. But it goes on for decades and decades and decades until you've killed off enough tissue that now it's gone past just getting some symptoms once in a while. Now you've got a diagnosis. And when the diagnosis comes, whether it's Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or rheumatoid arthritis or psoriasis or diabetes, when the diagnosis comes, people think they've gotten the disease. No, you've just crossed the threshold that this thing's been going on for so long, killing off tissue, killing off tissue, killing off tissue, until you got to the point to where you killed off enough tissue that the symptoms became obvious and you really can't avoid anymore. And you go see a doctor, and then the doctor says, I'm sorry, you got an autoimmune disease, whether it's Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. I just read a paper yesterday that a new paper has come out on Parkinson's, and they tell us that the pre diagnosis stage of Parkinson's it's called the prodromal period. It's a good Scrabble word. The prodromal period. It means there's a problem going on under the surface that isn't yet bad enough to be diagnosed as a disease. That in the prodromal period of Parkinson's, one of the things that's a very strong indicator is if people lose their sense of smell. So they looked at hundreds and hundreds of people. I think it was 480 people in this one study and 2,200 in another study. And they looked at their sense of smell. If they were between 58 and 85 years old, between 58 and 85, those that had completely lost their sense of smell had 4 times the risk of dying within 5 years compared to someone the same age that had not lost their sense of smell. So these are people that don't know they have a problem, but they've lost their sense of smell. Slowly over time, it's getting worse and worse and worse. And so there's really simple tests. At the Institute of Functional Medicine, where I teach, we have a course where we teach doctors about functional medicine. And one of the things we do is teach them how to do a nutritional exam. And one of the things in the nutritional exam is a 4-scent smell test. And a little card, and you scratch the card, and what does it smell like? And then you scratch another part of the card, and what does it smell like? And people are startled that so many of our practitioners discover that they couldn't tell that that was the smell of cinnamon, or they couldn't tell that that was the smell of pine bark, or whatever the smell is they're testing. That is so very, very common. But I use this as an example because when you lose your sense of smell, it's an indicator of brain degeneration. It has nothing to do with your nose. The vast majority of time, it's the neurons, it's the nerves in your brain that are degenerating. And it's a prerequisite to the diagnosis of Parkinson's. And it's an autoimmune mechanism that sets it up. It's when your body's making antibodies. So I'm going to give you an example of this. Dr. Melissa Arbuckle, and this is in, I think it's like page 5 of my book. I mean, we start off with this right away. Actually, it is. It's page 5. I just checked. It is page 5 of the book about Dr. Melissa Arbuckle's article. She went to the VA, that's the Veterans Administration, in 2002 and looked for people with the autoimmune disease lupus. And she found 132 people with lupus in this one VA center. Now, if they're being treated in a VA center, they're veterans. If they're veterans, they were in the armed forces. If they were in the armed forces, they had their blood drawn many, many times over the years when they were in the armed forces. And what most people don't know is that the government has been saving all of that blood since 1978. They've got tens of millions of samples of our service people's blood frozen. Well, Dr. Arbuckle went back, and she knew about this, and so she went back and asked for permission. Can she look at some of the blood work for people currently diagnosed with lupus when they were healthy in the armed forces, in the Navy or the Air Force? And she received permission, and so she went back and she looked, and what did she find? Find that every single person who was diagnosed with lupus had all 7 antibodies. There are 7 different antibodies. All 7 antibodies were elevated years and years before they ever had a symptom. Before they ever had a symptom. And I'll talk about what it means to have elevated antibodies. But the average was 5 years beforehand. Some of them 9 years beforehand. These antibodies were elevated. And every year they got a little bit worse, a little bit worse, a little bit worse. And when you have elevated antibodies, and I'll explain this in just a minute, you're killing off tissue. So you kill off tissue, kill off tissue, kill off tissue, until eventually you've killed off enough tissue. Now you start getting some symptoms because that organ can't work quite right anymore. And when you start getting the symptoms, you put up with them for a while, they get worse, and then you finally go to a doctor. They can't figure out what's wrong. They give you a medication that doesn't help. You go back 3 to 6 months later. The average is it takes a year and a half to get the right diagnosis. So a year and a half to 2 years to get the right diagnosis of lupus. But all 7 of these antibodies were elevated years beforehand. And it was Dr. Arbuckle's article that started this whole discussion here in the United States of what's called predictive autoimmunity. And we'll want to talk about that you can identify where is your body attacking itself right now. Do you have the mechanism going on right now for lupus or for rheumatoid or for multiple sclerosis or for Parkinson's or for Alzheimer's, years before there's so much damage that you get the symptoms? That's the world of predictive autoimmunity, and that's what this book is about, is understanding this whole concept that our immune system, when it's trying to protect us, and we'll talk about why that is, it's trying to protect us, but there's collateral damage that occurs to our tissue, killing off tissue, killing off tissue, killing off tissue, and eventually you get the symptoms, and then eventually you get the diagnosis of a particular autoimmune disease. So the step-by-step progression of this is that first you get cellular damage from the increased antibodies. The antibodies are attacking cells. Then the cellular damage accumulates, and so you get tissue damage. Then the tissue damage continues until you get inflammation in that particular organ. The inflammation continues until you get organ damage. There's measurable damage. You know, the organ, whether it's your brain or your myelin or your liver or your kidneys or your pancreas, it's getting damaged and it's measurable that it's not quite working as well as it should be. Then you eventually get symptoms because the organ's not working the way it should be. And then you finally get the diagnosis. And so you get a diagnosis, and the doctor tells you that you've just developed lupus, or you've just developed MS, or you've just developed rheumatoid. Well, it's been developing for years under the surface. You just didn't know. And it's what we call early pathogenic autoimmunity, that when you have these elevated antibodies, it's killing off tissue, but it's early. It's before there's enough damage to where you get a diagnosis. And so that was the work of Dr. Arbuckle back in 2003. She published the study. And what we now know, and so scientists all over the world said, well, that's brilliant. I'm going to go back to other blood banks, and I'm going to look for people with scleroderma, another autoimmune disease, or I'm going to look for people with Hashimoto's, the thyroid disease, or I'm going to look with people with celiac disease. And they went back and they looked at many different autoimmune diseases, and every time they looked, they found the same thing, and that is that the immune system trying to protect you is killing off tissue years before you ever get symptoms related to a particular autoimmune disease. And the symptoms continue. The lifestyle continues that's causing that problem. And then eventually you kill off enough tissue with organ damage and inflammation. Now eventually the symptoms come, and now you get the diagnosis of an autoimmune disease. See, your immune system is the armed forces in your body. It's the Army, the Air Force, the Marines, the Coast Guard, the Navy. It's there to protect you. And it doesn't go haywire when you've been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. Rather, it's trying to protect you. What's it trying to protect you from? It's trying to protect you from the toxic environment, in most cases, that you're being exposed to. For example, if you get a diagnosis of celiac disease, for those people, wheat is a toxic environmental thing. And anything outside your body comes from the environment. So food is the main environmental trigger that we're exposed to. And if wheat is considered a toxin by your body, you may develop celiac disease or many others, but celiac disease is the one that's most well known. So these environmental triggers that set us off, I'll give you an example. Many of us have heard about the problems with the chemicals in plastic water bottles, that the plastic water bottles leach plasticizers into the water. And the most common one is called bisphenol A or BPA. That's the most common one. Well, BPA, according to the Journal of the American Medical Association, is molecule for molecule as potent as the strongest estrogen. And what that means is that when you get this tiny amount of BPA in your drinking water from the plastic bottle that the water was transported in, you get a little bit of BPA. And you get a little bit of BPA, it's not going to kill you. It's just too small. There's such a minute amount. But it accumulates in your body. And it binds onto receptor sites like estrogen receptor sites or testosterone receptor sites. And if it binds onto testosterone receptor sites for men, well, men, what happens is one of the big contributors to the current statistic is that men today have on average 1/3 the testosterone that their grandfathers had at the same age. That men are very deficient in testosterone, which makes them vulnerable to testicular cancer and, many other conditions. Cardiovascular disease is rampant when you have low testosterone. When men have low testosterone, the good cholesterol called HDL, the good cholesterol doesn't work to clean your pipes. Even when you've got adequate amounts of HDL, the good cholesterol, it requires testosterone to work properly in men. And when you have low levels of testosterone, HDL doesn't work. So you get a blood test that says your cholesterol's good and the HDLs are really good. Your doctor gives you a stamp of approval, and you're vulnerable to getting a heart attack, and you never know. And that's our neighbor who down the street, who everybody's got a neighbor down the street who had a heart attack at 48 or 54 or 56, and he just had a physical 3 months ago, and he was so healthy. How could he have a heart attack? Well, because they didn't think to look at testosterone levels for some of these men as a potential contributor to the risk of a fatal heart attack. But it also goes back in this example to bisphenol A binding on to your testicular receptor sites. And so you don't make enough testosterone. Or in women, it binds into the estrogen sites. And so that includes the estrogen sites in the breast. So women of childbearing age, when they have their first baby, their breast milk is loaded with toxic chemicals. Governments around the world now are cautioning, Norway, for example, cautioning women in the first pregnancy about their breast milk, that they really need to be tested because if they're toxic with these chemicals from the environment that have been accumulating in their bodies, then we give that breast milk to our babies when they're breastfeeding, but it's full of these toxins that have been accumulating in the fat cells of the breast. And so baby gets exposed to a lot of bisphenol A, which prevents the development of baby's brain properly, the area of the brain called the hypothalamus, which deals with hormones and with emotions later in life. And that area of baby's brain doesn't develop properly, which we think is one of the contributors as to why now 1 boy in 2 is estimated within the next 10 years, 1 boy in 2 will be on the autism spectrum. So this whole thing about your autoimmune mechanism, that the immune system's trying to protect you from all these toxic chemicals that bind in your body. And it's all outlined in the book. I'm trying to give kind of a big picture overview of why we have to understand this. And when you understand it, there's simple things you do that really can make such a difference. For example, everyone should leave their shoes at the door when they walk in the house. Why is that? Well, it's not a Zen Buddhist thing, but rather you walked home and you walk on your neighbor's sidewalk to come to your home. Your neighbor sprayed the sidewalk with Roundup a couple days ago to kill the dandelions between the concrete slabs. Well, now you've got Roundup on the bottom of your shoes. You walk in the house on the carpet with your shoes. Now you get Roundup on the carpet. And now you've got your infant child crawling around on the carpet, or your teenage daughter laying on the floor on the carpet doing her homework, and they get Roundup in their hands and their arms and their legs. And Roundup, these toxic chemicals, these GMO chemicals, are very toxic to the body. That's why you leave your shoes at the door. And why do you get rid of all the plastic storage containers in your kitchen? Because they all leach toxic chemicals into the food that you put in the plastic container. Get glass containers. Get glass containers, and your family is much safer and won't be exposed to these small amounts of toxic chemicals that accumulate inside of your body. And why do you, when you go to the coffee shop, not get the plastic lid on the cup of coffee or the cup of tea? Because the steam from the hot beverage goes up to the underside of the lid, condenses, and drops back down into the liquid full of bisphenol A. And then you put it up to your lips, and so the hot liquid hits the underside of the lid and leaches bisphenol A out of the lid, and it tapers down through the opening into your mouth. And you get loaded with bisphenol A. And one cup isn't a problem for you, but day after week after month after year of all these tiny little exposures, they accumulate in your body. And your immune system has to try and protect you from this stuff and makes antibodies to these different tissues that are holding on to bisphenol A and endocrine disrupting chemicals and lead and mercury. And the result is you get elevated antibodies to myelin. Let's talk about myelin for a moment. There are a number of studies that show if you have a sensitivity to dairy, the casein protein in dairy, if you make antibodies to the casein protein in dairy, those antibodies can attack your myelin. And if they attack your myelin, they put holes in your myelin. So if you have elevated antibodies to dairy, you have to check to see, do you also have elevated antibodies to myelin basic protein? Because if you do, that's the mechanism of MS. And for some people, not every MS patient, but for some people, the trigger that sets it off and fuels it to continue is a sensitivity to dairy. And you keep eating dairy, drinking milk and eating cheese and eating yogurt. So there's just a world to learn here about this, about autoimmunity. And the takeaway message is that you can identify this. You can identify and see if this is going on in your body right now. And if it is going on, that's going to motivate you to ask the question, well, what do I do about this? How do I get these antibodies out of there? And it's all explained in the book about where these antibodies come from, how do you test for them, and what do you do about it if you've got them. So that's all in the book. So this is a topic that it's the number 3 cause of getting sick and dying in the world that no one checks for. No one checks for this. And my target, my goal is that people understand this mechanism and they just check with their doctor to see, do they have a sensitivity to their environment? And the most common one is the foods that they're eating. Do they have a sensitivity to the foods that they're eating? And if they do, and then you also check to see, do you have a sensitivity to your own tissue, making antibodies to your own tissue, whether it's your brain or your heart or your liver, whatever tissue it might be.
Wow, that is absolutely amazing. And just on a personal note, I hate wearing shoes. So as soon as I get in from anywhere, my shoes automatically come off. And I prefer walking outside without shoes as well in the garden. I just don't like shoes. So the soles of my feet get quite hard. They get quite dirty. But hey, I'm saving on shoe leather.
Oh, well, there you go. There you go. Well, in your case, what I would recommend to people is when you come in the house, wash your feet, because your feet are carrying the same things, picking up some of the same things that the bottom of the shoes may pick up. So I think it's great to walk barefoot, when you can. But if you're going to walk barefoot outside, when you come in the house, you wash your feet so that you don't carry the toxins that are out there in the environment into your home environment.
Very good. And how do people get hold of the book? Is it available on Amazon or do they buy it via you?
It is available on Amazon, but if they go to our website to get the book, if you go to the homepage of thedr.com, thedoctor.com, if you go to that homepage, you can click on it right there and it takes you right to Amazon. But then you also have a number of handouts that are available to you that you can download for free that are in addition to the book. So you can certainly go to Amazon, but if you go to thedoctor.com, thedr.com, it's right on the homepage. You click on it and it takes you to Amazon, but there's a number of downloads that you can then get.
Well, thank you very much, Tom. It's been an experience as always, and we'll have to have you back again in the new year.
Oh, thank you, Linda. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
This show is sponsored by Dr. Tom O'Brien, who is thrilled to share that his company, thedoctor.com, offers some powerful products to help reverse autoimmune disease. At thedoctor.com/PRPSPIAY, you'll find 9 products to help you decrease inflammation, repair the gut, and rebuild the immune system. Any questions or comments you may have, please email me, Linda, Linda, @ldnrt.org. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciated your company. Until next time, stay safe and keep well.